So 2 weeks have passed since the last election, and there have been no shortage of theories about why the election went the way it did.
Trump is indicted, 91 times? He was impeached twice. He's the oldest president ever to be elected, and he still won. If you can't beat that individual, your party has a problem, you have a problem, and you need to re-examine it.
Joe Biden essentially delivered the White House back to Donald Trump by not getting out of the way in January.
Look at my top 5 reasons again why the Democratic Party lost this presidential election. The economy, immigration, crime, the woke culture, no primary candidate.
As you might recall, I made a video shortly before the election explaining my plans to vote no preference at this election cycle. Now, my main 2 reasons for doing so were the fundamental flaws in our current first-past-the-post election system that invariably leads to a mere 2-party system. An outcome is deterministic that way, whereas what we need is more choices and also more competition between ideas for a healthy democracy. And also, other reason was the corrosive effects of the 2010 Citizens United ruling by the Supreme Court, which I firmly believe needs to be constitutionally amended as a matter of priority before we can ever go back to politics as normal.
In the richest country in the history of the world, today, the people on top are doing phenomenally well, while 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And then, Kristen, on top of all of that, we got a corrupt campaign finance system, which allows billionaires to buy elections.
I mean, the 2 parties spend about $20 billion this election cycle only to have their candidates elected. Of course, all of this money comes with a price and with invisible strings attached. It's really the price that we all end up paying in terms of quid pro quos by politicians. But today, what I want to do is I want to share why I didn't vote for the lesser evil and supported the Democratic Party as I had in all the past elections that I had been a part of. Many pundits blamed the economy for this election shift, as exit polls showed that inflation and financial hardship dominated the concerns of the average voter.
In 2024, nearly 3/4 of Americans said strengthening the economy should be a top policy priority, while a third mentioned economic issues as the nation's most important problem. As of June 2024, confidence in the economy under President Biden averaged nearly 28 points lower compared to during former President Trump's term.
But if inflation is the increase in the money supply, according to the Austrian School of Economics, it didn't just materialize under President Biden. In reality, it began as a result of every president in the past few decades running a recurrent budget deficit that led to our national debt, and that this debt had to be paid off by increasing the debt ceiling through printing more money. But especially with the stimulus money that we ended up spending during the COVID under President Trump, and then unfortunately continued also with this loose monetary policy under President Biden. This kind of borrowing and spending spree invariably leads to inflation, which is arguably the most insidious tax, as it disproportionately affects the poor and the middle class. This overspending race to the bottom now appears to be the norm in our politics, and I don't really see a way out under our current election system. But I still find it interesting that voters chose Trump believing that he would fix this inflationary pressure that is present as a result of all of our monetary policy in the past, even though that his policies of added tariffs and also pressuring the Fed to lower interest rates and also promoting more spending should technically at least exacerbate price increases, not lower them. So we'll just have to see how things turn out. But to truly understand this election, what we need to do is we need to move beyond economics.
The final era is a more diffuse one, the dominance of identity politics on the left, which made it push for all kinds of DEI policies that largely came out of the urban academic bubble, but alienated many mainstream voters.
For me personally, the reason I left the Democratic Party and became an independent was primarily related to the weaponization of identity politics over the past couple of decades by the Democrats. Historically, identity politics was a tool of the right, often wielded by a fringe white majority to maintain dominance in the antebellum South. But after the civil rights movement of the 1960s, there was a genuine push racial equality and race blindness, and a steady, albeit a very slow improvement in race relations followed in the ensuing decades. Unfortunately, this progress was not fast enough for some people during the past few decades, and the new left embraced and also doubled down on the game of identity politics. Instead of fighting to eradicate it from the right side of the ledger, they engaged in it from the opposite direction by organizing grieving minorities against the white majority. Here's the problem with identity politics. As I explained in my previous video, identity politics breeds tribalism, and tribalism has and continues to be a destructive force in history. It fractures societies into us versus them mentality, consuming people in perpetual conflict. In academia, especially in schools like mine, ideologies inspired by postmodernism and critical theories spilled out of the graduate halls of academia and into the public discourse by recent graduates over the past couple of decades, where they also were weaponized by politicians and political groups. Academic concepts such as critical theory led into critical race theory, and also intersectionality emerged from these intellectual environments, emphasizing tribal wounds and past grievances instead of attempting to heal them. As an immigrant, I've always been wary of tribalism. I've seen how it destroys communities and nations, and yet the left embraced it, often under the guise of anti-racism, which, let's be honest, as Thomas Sowell coined the phrase, is just racism under new management. When you frame societal issues through the lens of oppressor and oppressed, you pit the minorities against the majority. But this attempt rounds the heterogeneous majority into a coalition under attack, consolidating them into a tribe on its own. And that's really not progress. That's a recipe for a backlash that America just received. For me, this shift in democratic values was an alienating and as subversive of a factor as inflation was to the average voter. I knew that it was just bad news and it would end up badly. So while I couldn't bring myself to vote for Trump, largely because of his leadership style as well as his personality and approach, I also couldn't continue supporting a Democratic Party that seems blind to the harmful effects of identity politics. This election has been a wake-up call for both parties. Trump may have won the day, but this economic policies will have to be tested. And for the Democrats, the message is clear. Stop dividing people into tribes. Focus on universal principles that unite people across almost all common denominators. Our humanity, not our identity. I can only hope that they don't double or triple down at this point on this wrong path of tribalism. My personal experience, I feel, is representative of their past customers. As a radical moderate, I will keep holding both parties accountable, because the truth is neither party really truly represents the silent majority of Americans right in the middle who just want to get along in a fair functioning system, and they have absolutely no interest in playing the destructive game of identity politics. In future videos, I will look deeper into these academic disciplines that lead to postmodernism, critical theories, and other ideologies, and I will try to break these down for you in a digestible, short form on this channel. So let's keep the conversation going, folks. What do you guys think? What are your thoughts? Why do you think the election turned out the way it did? I hope the answer is not because of racism. There are many more profound reasons for why the election turned out the way it did. I would love to hear from you, however, and let's work together in the meantime to find a better path forward.